My name is Sarah Kendall, and the day my family stole my grandmother's farm behind my back, something in me broke, but not the way they expected. Months later, when the truth finally came out, I stood in that lawyer's office holding me's signed all rights deed and slid it across the table while my mother's face drained of color, asking her quietly, "Still think I don't deserve this land, Elaine? Before I start from the beginning, tell me where you're watching from in the comments." On an early summer morning in rural Kentucky, I was knee-deep in mud behind the chicken coop, trying to pry a busted latch back into place, when my younger sister Rachel sashayed across the yard in 4-inch heels like she was arriving at a fashion shoot instead of a farm. "Look at you," she said, flicking her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Enjoy your mud, Sarah. You don't deserve anything better." I straightened slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans. Rachel Kendall, 3 years younger, eternally dramatic, and convinced the world owed her applause, looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off the heel of her designer boots. "Better mud than lies," I shot back, my voice sharper than the wire cutters hanging at my hip. Her eyes widened. "Excuse me. You heard me. At least out here, what you see is what you get." "Oh, please," she scoffed, stepping closer. "You're just jealous because Grandma Me won't hand this place over to you on a silver platter. Pretending you're the farm's savior doesn't make you one." "I never pretended anything," I said. "I'm the one doing the work." That's when the shouting started, loud, messy, emotional. Rachel threw her arms in the air. "You act like living here makes you special. Meanwhile, I'm actually doing something with my life." "Doing what exactly?" I snapped. "Shopping, complaining, calling Grandma's farm a burden every chance you get." Her jaw clenched. "You know what your problem is, Sarah. You think everyone owes you something. And you think you're entitled to everything." Our voices ricocheted off the red barn siding, sending the chickens fluttering in a panic. For a moment, I thought Rachel might actually slap me. She leaned in so close I could smell her perfume, sharp and citrusy, painfully out of place in the humid farm air. "Girls!" Her voice was soft, tired, and trembled just enough to stop both of us cold. Grandma Me stood a few steps away, our tiny, white-haired anchor in a faded apron. Her hands, wrinkled but steady, lifted gently as though she could push apart the storm with nothing but her palms. "Enough of this fighting," she whispered. "This farm has heard too much shouting over the years, not from my granddaughters too." Rachel immediately pivoted into her sweet-as-pie voice, the one she reserved only for people she wanted to impress. "Sorry, Grandma," she said, touching me's arm delicately. "I didn't mean to raise my voice." I bit my tongue. Of course she didn't mean that part of it. Me turned to me, her kind blue eyes full of something I couldn't quite name, sadness, fatigue, fear. "Sarah, honey," she said softly, "why don't you take a breather? I can finish up the feeding." "I'm fine," I muttered, swiping at my eyes before tears had the chance to fall. Rachel smirked, a tiny, cruel curl of her lip. Then, as if our argument had been a mild inconvenience instead of a wildfire, she turned and strutted back toward her shiny white SUV. The gravel crunched under her heels as she climbed in, revved the engine, rolled down the window, and laughed. Then she sped off down the long dirt drive, leaving dust swirling behind her and me standing there with mud on my boots and a sting in my throat. Grandma Me rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Don't let her words cut you, sweetheart." But they already had. And as I watched Rachel disappear around the bend, something icy settled in my chest. We weren't just sisters having a bad morning. There was a deeper crack in our family, a fault line waiting to split open. And as I stood by that chicken coop, tears slipping down my cheek, I had no idea just how far the fracture would go, or how much I'd lose before the truth finally came out. That evening, as the Kentucky sun melted into soft orange behind the hills, I stepped out onto the porch where Grandma Me rocked gently in her old wooden chair, its creak as familiar as her voice. The air smelled of honeysuckle and warm earth. Fireflies blinked lazily over the field, their tiny lights floating like quiet reminders that some things in life still glowed softly, even when family didn't. Me looked up the moment she heard the screen door sigh shut. "Come sit, sweetheart," she said, patting the faded cushion on the chair beside her. I lowered myself into it, feeling the cool breeze touch the heat still lingering on my skin from the argument earlier. For a moment, we just rocked in silence, the porch boards groaning beneath us in rhythm. Finally Me spoke, her voice thin but steady. "I'm sorry about how Rachel carried on this morning." I tried to shrug it off. "She wasn't raised to treat family like that. Me added quietly, as if she needed to speak the truth out loud. It's nothing I can't handle, I murmured, hoping she couldn't hear the lie tucked beneath the words. Me turned her head, studying me with those gentle eyes. You shouldn't have to handle it alone. I looked out across the fields instead of answering. The golden grass swayed like a slow tide, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe, to let the day fall away without replaying every sharp word. But me wasn't done. You've carried more than your fair share on this farm, she said. And I'm grateful more than you know. I shook my head. Grandma, I help because I want to, you don't owe me anything. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached across the small space between us and took my hand, her skin papery, warm, familiar. The rocking chairs creaked again, soft and steady, as the fireflies drifted closer. A few hovered near me's dress, glowing against the pale cotton like living stars. Your mother called me earlier, she said suddenly. My stomach tightened. Oh, she wanted to apologize for Rachel's behavior, me continued, though her tone carried something uncertain beneath it. But she also asked if I planned on making any decisions about the farm soon. My breath caught. She asked that, me nodded. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. Something about the way she said it, too light, too quick, made my heart pinch. Grandma, I started, but she squeezed my hand gently. Don't you worry about me, Sarah. I've lived on this land my whole life. I know its storms and I know its seasons, and I know my family good and bad. She gave me a small smile, softening the weight of her words. We fell into silence again, the quiet peaceful this time instead of heavy. A train horn sounded faintly from miles away, drifting over the fields like a lonely reminder that the world beyond the farm kept moving whether we were ready or not. You're a good girl, me whispered after a long moment. And you've stayed when others didn't, I swallowed hard. I stayed because I love this place, and I love you. Me leaned her head back, eyes glistening in the dimming light. Family isn't always easy, she said. But loyalty, that's rare. And you've given me that every day. The porch creaked beneath us, the moment lingering like the fireflies hanging in the air. Despite the morning's bitterness, despite the sting of Rachel's laugh, I felt a small swell of peace settle in my chest. This quiet moment with me was why I stayed, why I fought, why the farm mattered. The wind curled around us, lifting the ends of me's white hair as she whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you for being here with me, Sarah." And as the fireflies blinked across the field and the last light dipped behind the hills, I squeezed her hand back, letting the stillness soothe the day's ache. But even in that calm, even with her beside me, I didn't know the storm our family was already stirring in the dark. The next afternoon, the smell of roast chicken drifted through the backyard as our family gathered beneath the massive oak tree, the same one my great-grandfather planted when he returned from the war. A long wooden table sat beneath the shade, covered in red and white checkered cloths. The late-day sun spilled golden light through the branches, dappling bowls of green beans, cornbread wrapped in warm towels, and me's famous peach cobbler cooling at the end of the table. For a few quiet minutes, it almost looked like tradition, like the Kendalls weren't quietly splitting apart. My parents arrived together. My mother, Elaine Kendall, immaculate in a cream blouse despite the dirt road leading to the farm, leaned down to kiss me's cheek. My father, Roger, tall and barrel-chested, carried a folding chair under each arm like the day was perfectly ordinary. Rachel showed up fashionably late, of course, sunglasses perched on her head, and a dramatic sigh as she plopped down beside my mother. I stayed near me, helping her settle into her chair, though I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone had shown up with an agenda. "Beautiful spread, Mama," my father said as he poured himself some sweet tea. Me smiled warmly. "Well, I've had some help lately." She didn't look at me directly, but I felt her gratitude like a soft squeeze on my heart. We passed bowls and plates, the sound of silverware and chatter filling the warm air. It felt normal for a moment until my father cleared his throat. "So me," he said casually, "have you thought any more about retiring?" The word sliced through the peaceful hum like a dull knife. Me blinked. "Retiring from what, Roger?" "The farm," he said lightly, as if the topic were harmless. "You've worked this land a long time. Maybe it's time to think about selling it. Get yourself a nice place in town, somewhere easier." I set down my biscuit slowly, pulse tightening behind my ribs. My mother reached under the table and discreetly squeezed his hand. Rachel lifted her glass and took a delicate sip, pretending disinterest, but her eyes flicked toward me in the way she did when she thought she'd already won something. Me gave a soft laugh. This land is my home. Why would I leave it now? My mother jumped in, her voice honey soft. Mama, no one's saying you have to rush anything, but you're getting older. Living out here alone isn't safe. A condo in town would be so much more comfortable. I'm not alone, Me replied gently. Sarah's here. Every head turned toward me. Rachel raised a perfectly plucked brow. But Sarah doesn't plan to stay forever, right? Her tone made the question sound like an accusation. I lifted my chin. I'm here as long as Grandma needs me. My father gave a patient smile, the kind he used when he'd already decided what the answer should be. It's just smart planning, honey. Farms are a lot of work, too much for me at her age. Me bristled. I'm not helpless, Roger. No one said you were, he soothed. But the land has value, a lot of value. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life. There it was, the shift, the mask slipping, not concern, not care, interest. Rachel reached for another biscuit, trying too hard to appear bored. Dad's right, you could travel, relax, actually enjoy yourself for once. And what happens to the farm? I asked quietly. My mother glanced at my father. He glanced at Rachel. No one answered. The breeze lifted the checkered cloth, the plates clinking softly as if the table itself sensed the tension tightening around us. I looked at each of them, my parents with their polite, rehearsed smiles, Rachel with her smug confidence, and something inside me twisted tight. They weren't just thinking aloud, they'd discussed this, planned this, without me, without me. A knot formed in my stomach as Me reached for her tea with slightly trembling hands. The farm wasn't just land. It was her life, her history. Our bloodline, yet sitting there beneath the oak tree, surrounded by sweet tea and polite conversation masking greed, I felt the mood shift like a cloud sliding over the sun. Something was wrong, something bigger than a casual suggestion, something they didn't want me to notice. But I did, I noticed everything. And as I bit into a warm biscuit that suddenly tasted like dust, I knew my family wanted more than to help me, they wanted control. And they weren't going to stop until they got it. Night settled heavy over the farm, thick with humidity and the low rumble of distant thunder, when I climbed the ladder to the barn loft. My unofficial sanctuary since childhood. The smell of hay, dust, and old wood wrapped around me like an old quilt. I flicked on the small lantern I kept up there, its warm glow spreading across the beams. Below me, the horses shifted lazily in their stalls, unaware that the ground beneath my life had shifted, too. I sank onto an old trunk, elbows on my knees, and replayed the dinner like a movie I wished I could walk out of. My father's tone, my mother's quick glances, Rachel's smug half-smile, all of it clicked together like snapped puzzle pieces. They're vultures, I whispered into the stillness. The words echoed off the rafters, sounding truer out loud than they had in my head. I reached for the framed picture I kept tucked beside the lantern, a black and white photograph of me at 16, sitting tall on a paint horse, chin lifted proudly. I ran my thumb along the frame, feeling that familiar ache of wanting to protect her the way she once protected me. Grandma, they want you out of the way, I murmured to her younger self. They want the land, the money, everything. Lightning flickered through the cracks in the wood siding, briefly illuminating the loft. A rumble followed, deep and rolling, vibrating through the old beams. I didn't want to believe my own family could be so calculated. But the looks they exchanged, the timing, the softness in their voices that didn't match the hunger in their eyes, it wasn't about Me's safety. It wasn't about her comfort. It was about control. And I felt sick realizing they might have been planning this long before today. My chest tightened as another memory surfaced. Rachel bragging last month about a big opportunity coming soon. My mother asking me casually if Me ever forgot things or needed help managing money. My father browsing real estate listings on his phone when he thought no one noticed. All breadcrumbs leading here. I leaned back, letting my head hit the barn wall with a dull thud. Of course, I muttered. Of course this is what they're doing. I picked up the picture again, gripping it tight. You trusted them, Grandma, I said. But I don't, not anymore. The horses shifted below, their hooves thumping lightly as thunder cracked louder this time. The storm was rolling in fast, and the air in the loft buzzed with a strange electricity, not just from the weather but from the certainty building inside me. A certainty I hadn't allowed myself to feel until tonight. I pushed up to my feet, pacing across the loft, my boots crunching over stray hay. They want to decide for you, I whispered. Plan for you, sell your home right out from under you. My anger rose, sharp and hot, cutting through the fear. I looked out through a narrow window that framed the silhouette of the old oak tree swaying under the approaching storm. That tree had stood longer than any of us. Me had told me its roots ran deeper than people realized. Just like hers, just like mine. I took a breath, a long, steady one, and let the anger settle into something clearer. Something resolute. I'm not letting them touch this place, I said, voice low but solid. Not one acre, not one nail, not one memory. Lightning lit up the fields in a burst of white, and the thunder followed instantly, loud enough to shake dust from the rafters. I didn't flinch. For the first time that day, maybe the first time in months, I felt steady. Focused. Ready. My family wanted a fight they believed they'd already won. But they'd forgotten one thing: this farm wasn't theirs. And neither was me. The storm cracked again overhead as I set the lantern down, the picture frame still in my hand. Whatever they're planning, I whispered to me's younger face, I'll stop it, I swear. Then the thunder rolled across the hills, deep and final, like a seal placed on the vow I'd just made. 2 mornings later, the sky hung over the farm like dull tin, the air heavy with the quiet threat of another storm as I stepped into the kitchen and found my mother waiting for me. Elaine Kendall stood by the counter, manicured fingers resting on a beige folder. She wore her usual serious talk outfit, crisp slacks, a blouse without a wrinkle, and a smile that never reached her eyes. Good, she said, tapping the folder. You're here, we need to discuss something important. I kept my distance. Where's Grandma? Resting, she replied, her tone clipped. And frankly, that's part of the issue. Before I could ask what she meant, she pushed the folder across the table. Thick brochures slid out, glossy pictures of smiling seniors in pastel rooms. Honey Blossom Assisted Living, Maple Grove Memory Center, Sunset Acres, A New Beginning. I felt my jaw clench. What is this? I asked. My mother gave a dry exhale. Don't be dramatic, they're options, very good ones I might add. She doesn't need a nursing home, I snapped. Elaine crossed her arms, shifting her weight like she was bracing herself for my predictable resistance. It's your turn to convince her. She trusts you more than the rest of us. I'm not lying to her, I said, my voice flat, her eyes hardened. This isn't lying, this is planning, being responsible. For who? I asked. Her or you? A rustle in the doorway made me glance over. Rachel leaned against the frame, arms crossed, smirk already in place. Well, if it isn't Farmer Sarah, she said sweetly. Mom told me you'd be stubborn. I'm not stubborn, I said. I'm protective. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Protective or possessive? It's hard to tell sometimes. I ignored her and faced my mother. Did Grandma ask for this? She doesn't know what's best for her anymore, Elaine muttered. I stepped forward. She knows exactly what she wants, and it's to stay here on her land. Oh, please, Rachel scoffed, walking fully into the kitchen now. She can't keep up with the place. None of us can babysit her forever. I'm not babysitting her, I said. I'm helping her. Same thing, she replied, flicking imaginary dust off her shirt. The urge to scream rose hot in my chest, but I kept still, kept calm because someone had to. My mother lifted the brochure again. Sarah, we're doing what's necessary. She can't live alone. She's not alone, I said firmly. She has me. Elaine paused, eyes narrowing with an edge I'd only seen during high-stakes PTA meetings. The kind where she'd smile sweetly while cutting someone down with perfect precision. What happens when you change your mind? She asked softly. When you decide you've wasted your 20s tied to a dying farm, something in me snapped, not loudly, not visibly, quietly like a small branch giving under pressure. I'm not convincing her, I said, not ever. Rachel rolled her eyes dramatically. Shocker. I straightened the papers into a neat stack and slid them back toward my mother. You can do your planning without me. Leave her out of it. My mother's lips pursed into a thin line. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I stepped toward the doorway. No, I said, brushing past Rachel. You are. I walked out before either of them could respond, letting the screen door slam behind me. The wind outside had picked up, whipping dust across the yard in tiny spirals. Dry leaves skittered along the porch steps like they were trying to flee the tension in the house. I inhaled deeply, letting the air sting my lungs. They were closing in, talking behind doors, plotting their angle. And the worst part was, I could feel the storm building not in the sky, but in my own bones. As the wind tugged at my shirt and the brochures sat untouched on the kitchen table behind me, I knew, whatever my family was planning, this was only the beginning. 3 quiet weeks slipped by, the farm settling into its familiar rhythms again. Chickens pecking at morning light, the old windmill clacking in the distance. me humming as she folded laundry, until one sharp autumn morning when everything shattered. I walked down the gravel path toward the mailbox, kicking aside a fallen oak leaf. The air had turned cooler overnight, crisp enough to sting my cheeks. For the first time in days, I felt the faintest hint of peace until I saw it. A thick legal envelope, stamped, official, my name scrawled across the front. My stomach dropped. Notice of property transfer and sale. The words blurred as I ripped the seal open. Pages spilled into my hands, contracts, filing dates, signatures I recognized too well. My mother's, my father's. I felt the world tilt. No, no, they didn't. I flipped to the last page, breath stuttering as I scanned the bold print. Petition for guardianship, me Kendall declared legally incompetent. My grandmother, incompetent, behind my back, behind hers. My knees nearly gave on the spot. They didn't just talk, they acted, quietly, secretly, legally. I clutched the papers to my chest and forced myself to breathe as my pulse hammered in my ears. The farm around me suddenly felt foreign, like the land itself recoiled from what had been done. I didn't tell me. I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I grabbed my keys, heart thrashing, and drove down the long dirt road without a word. The tires kicked up dust in frantic clouds as I left the farm behind and headed toward town. By the time I reached the lawyer's office, a brick building with peeling green paint, my hands were trembling so hard I nearly dropped the doorknob. Inside, the air was too cold, too clean, and the receptionist gave me a polite smile that nearly made me crumble. A man in a gray suit, mid-50s with tired eyes, stepped out of a side office. "You must be Sarah," he said gently. "I'm Attorney Whitlow, come on back." I followed him into a small conference room. The door clicked shut behind us. "Can you explain what this is?" I asked, thrusting the papers toward him. My voice shook, but I didn't care. He flipped through the packet, nodding slowly, painfully. "Yes," he said finally, setting the documents on the table. "I'm afraid I can." The quiet in the room deepened, pulling tight around my throat. "Your parents filed for guardianship over your grandmother last week," he explained. "They claimed she was no longer capable of managing her affairs. Based on the medical evaluation they submitted, the judge approved it." A cold, hollow sound escaped me, half gasp, half disbelief. "But she's fine," I said. "She cooks, she gardens, she pays her bills, she—" "I understand," Whitlow said, raising a hand gently. "But all the court sees is paperwork, and the paperwork was convincing." I gripped the edge of the table hard enough that my knuckles whitened. "So they can just take everything just like that," he nodded solemnly. "They've already initiated the sale of the property, and since they're now her legal guardians, they don't need her consent." I felt my heart crack. "My own parents," I whispered, "did this to her." "To both of you," he corrected softly. I sank into the chair behind me, dizzy. The quiet hum of the office clock felt cruel, ticking on as if my world hadn't just collapsed. "What do I do?" I finally asked. Whitlow folded his hands. "Legally, you can challenge the guardianship, but it will require evidence. Medical reports, witness statements, and time. Time, the one thing we might not have." My throat tightened. "They're going to take her home. They're going to rip her away from everything she knows." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth sat between us like a stone. I stood slowly, gathering the papers with stiff fingers. My legs felt like wet clay as I headed for the door. "Sarah," Whitlow called softly as I reached the hallway. "I'm sorry," I nodded, unable to speak. The drive back home was silent. No radio, no thoughts. Just shock settling like frost across every inch of me. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, Mee was sitting on the porch, her knitting in her lap, unaware that the world she'd spent 8 decades building had just been stolen. I couldn't tell her yet. Not like this. Not while my voice still trembled. So I swallowed the dread and forced myself to walk toward her, the papers burning in my hands. On the porch steps, before she even looked up, I felt the weight of the future shift, dark and heavy. The storm had finally broken, and nothing on this farm would ever be the same again. By the time afternoon light slanted over the porch, I finally found enough strength to sit beside me and tell her everything, every ugly detail, every betrayal inked onto those papers now soft from my shaking hands. Mee's tea steamed gently in front of her. She didn't pick it up at first, just folded her fingers around the cup like she was bracing herself against a cold wind that hadn't even touched her yet. "Grandma," my voice cracked. I swallowed and tried again. "They filed guardianship without telling you or me." Her knitting needles stopped moving. I slid the notice across the small table between us. My hand trembled so badly I had to steady the papers. She didn't look down right away. Instead, she watched me, really watched me with eyes that had softened every bruised knee and broken heart I'd ever had. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice thin as early frost. My throat tightened. "It means they told the court you can't make decisions anymore, that you're incompetent." The words stung in my mouth, and the judge believed them. Still she didn't look down. Her fingers curled around mine, warm and fragile. "They're selling the farm," I whispered. That's when she finally lowered her gaze. The papers rustled softly as she pulled them closer. Her eyes scanned the page in slow, careful movements, her breath catching once, twice, barely audible. A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. "I'm so sorry, Grandma. I didn't know, I didn't see it coming." Me didn't cry, she didn't gasp, she didn't rage. She just set the papers aside and reached for her tea, lifting the cup with a steadiness that stunned me. "If they want to move me," she said at last, "they'll do it." I stared at her. "What, Grandma? No, we can fight this. I will fight this." She took a small sip, her hands trembling only slightly. "Sarah, people do what they want when greed gets a hold of them. I've seen enough years pass to know that." My voice strained. "But this is your home, your life, you built everything here." Me nodded. "And they want what it's worth, sweetheart, not what it means." Her calmness cut deeper than if she'd screamed. I clenched my fists against my knees. "I won't let them take you away, or this farm, I promise you that." Her eyes lifted to mine, soft as worn denim. "You, Sarah, you fight." The words echoed in my chest, a fragile strength weaving through my grief. I swallowed hard. "I will, Grandma. I promise I'll fix this, no matter what." The porch around us felt smaller then, like the walls of the world were drawing in. Even the crickets seemed quieter, as if listening. Me leaned back in her rocking chair, still holding my hand. "Whatever happens, you remember this place is more than wood and soil. It's memory, it's legacy, it's us." A breeze drifted past, cool and thin, and for a moment the fireflies from the yard blinked toward the porch, tiny lanterns dancing in the growing dusk. I rested my head gently against her shoulder, letting my tears fall silently. She didn't wipe them away, didn't hush me. She simply rocked with me in the fading light, her breath steady, her presence a quiet anchor in a world suddenly tilting under our feet. And even though she told me to fight, I could feel how tired she was. How worn. How ready to surrender, not out of weakness, but out of heartbreak. I tightened my hand around hers, grounding myself in that fragile warmth. In that shrinking, shadowed space, grief and determination braided themselves so tightly inside me I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Part 8, Medium Tension, Second Turn. The next morning cracked open gray and cold, a thin mist hanging low over the fields as I pulled into the nursing home parking lot, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might bruise my ribs from the inside. I gripped the steering wheel for a moment, knuckles white. They had moved her overnight. Without telling me, without telling her. The thought made my stomach twist, but all I cared about now was getting to her, seeing her, making sure she was okay. I hurried through the entrance, the automatic doors sighing open like a reluctant apology. The smell hit me first, bleach, old linens, something metallic beneath it. A nurse at the front desk looked up, giving me a tight smile. "Hi," I said, breathless. "I'm here to see me Kendall. She should have been admitted sometime last night." The nurse's smile faltered. She glanced at her screen, her hand stilled on the mouse. I felt the change in the air before she even spoke. "Oh," she whispered. "You're Sarah." My pulse tripped. "Yes, I'm her granddaughter. I need to see her." The nurse stood slowly, coming around the desk like she was approaching someone in shock. "Honey, let's step outside for a moment." "What? Why?" My voice rose, thin and shaking. "Where's my grandmother?" She guided me toward the double doors leading to a small courtyard. My skin prickled. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. We stepped into the cold air, and she turned to me with soft, careful eyes. "She passed in the night," the nurse said gently. Peacefully, the world went silent. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't hear, couldn't move. The mist around us blurred into pale streaks as my vision wavered. "No," I whispered. "No, she was fine. She was fine yesterday." The nurse reached for my arm. "I'm so sorry." I pulled away, staggering back. A low, raw sound tore from my throat, something I didn't recognize as my own voice. "They took her from her home," I whispered. "They moved her here against her will. She must have been scared." "She must have." "I promise," the nurse said softly. "She wasn't alone. She fell asleep and she didn't wake up." But that didn't soothe the fire rising in my chest. It didn't soothe the truth clawing at my insides. They stole her home, they stole her peace. And now she was gone. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone. My mother's number glowed on the screen like a live wire. I pressed call before I could think, before I could stop myself. She answered on the first ring. "Sarah, honey, she's dead." I didn't recognize my voice. It sounded like someone standing on the edge of breaking. "Grandma is dead because of you." A long silence. Then my mother exhaled sharply. "Well," she said, tone flat as a cutting board, "it doesn't matter now. The property is almost ours." My heart stopped. "What did you just say?" "Oh, sweetie," she sighed as if I were being dramatic, "there's no point fighting anymore. The sale is practically finalized. We can talk about arrangements later, but right now," I hung up. Not because I wanted to end the conversation, but because if I'd heard one more word, I would have screamed until the building collapsed. The phone slipped from my fingers and hit the concrete with a dull clatter. My knees buckled, but I caught myself on the bench beside me, air sawing in and out of my lungs. The mist, the cold, the gray, it all blurred together as the truth hit me like a hammer. My family didn't care she was gone. They cared that the land was almost theirs. Grief surged up hot, so hot it burned through the fog and replaced it with something sharper, fiercer, darker. Rage, not the kind that made you yell, the kind that made you act. A storm roared through me louder than the thunder that had rolled across the farm the night I made my vow. "I won't let you take her home," I whispered, voice trembling but cert. "Not now, not ever." For the first time since this all began, I stopped feeling outnumbered. Now I felt unstoppable. Part 9, Low Tension. The sky was a dull sheet of gray the morning of the funeral, the kind that felt heavy enough to press the breath out of you. As I stood alone beneath the weeping willow at the edge of Hilltop Cemetery, the branches swayed like long green curtains, shielding me from the clusters of mourners gathered a few yards away. People had come, neighbors, old church friends, distant relatives, but I didn't see any of them. My eyes stayed fixed on the simple pine casket resting beside the open earth. My grandmother, my anchor, gone. Behind me, the soft crunch of footsteps drew my attention. My mother, Elaine, walked slowly between the rows of graves, dressed head to toe in black, her makeup perfectly done for the occasion. Roger trailed beside her, offering her his arm. Rachel walked a step behind them, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that looked far too theatrical to be sincere. I didn't move toward them. Didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the show they were putting on. The pastor began the service, voice trembling slightly in the breeze. Scripture, memories, gentle phrases about a life well lived. It all blurred together, a soft hum I barely heard. My parents stood shoulder to shoulder, a picture of grieving family. Rachel sniffled dramatically, clutching her purse like she was auditioning for a tragedy. I kept my gaze on the casket, my hands locked together so tightly the knuckles blanched. When it was over, when the last handful of dirt thudded softly against the wood, I whispered under my breath, "I'll fix this, Grandma, I promise." No one heard me, not even the wind. A week later, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The lawyer's office in town buzzed with the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the rustle of paperwork. The conference table was long, polished, intimidating. My parents sat across from me, their expressions composed but tense. Rachel sat beside them, twirling a pen like she owned the place. I sat alone at the opposite end of the table, because no one else in my family had earned the right to sit beside me. Attorney Whitlow cleared his throat. "We're here today for the reading of the will of Mrs. Me Kendall." My father leaned back, arms crossed casually. My mother's lips were pressed into a satisfied curve, the kind she wore when she thought a matter was as good as settled. Rachel looked like she was waiting for a check to be handed to her personally. Whitlow unfolded the document. At the time of her passing, Mrs. Kendall's estate includes all property, structures, livestock, and financial accounts under the Barkov Farm Registry. My mother straightened proudly. My father nodded as if this merely confirmed what he already believed. Whitlow continued. "It is Mrs. Kendall's directive that all property and assets, including the full Barkov Farm account, totaling $10 million, be transferred solely to her granddaughter, Ms. Sarah Kendall." Silence hit the room like a hammer. Elaine gasped, one hand flying to her chest. Rachel dropped her purse, the clatter echoing against the hardwood floor. Roger sat forward sharply, face flushing. "What money?" he barked. Whitlow adjusted his glasses calmly. "Mrs. Kendall's oil rights matured into a lucrative reserve. She chose to keep this information private and placed all assets in Ms. Kendall's name several months ago. The room froze. I sat completely still, the weight of the revelation settling into my bones. My grandmother had known, she'd known everything. And she'd protected me in the only way she could, by securing the land before they could touch it. My mother's composure cracked. There must be some mistake. Me would never cut out her own children. Rachel slammed her palm on the table. This is insane, she didn't even like being on the farm anymore. I didn't say a word, didn't blink, didn't look away from the people who had stolen my grandmother's final days and tried to steal her legacy too. Whitlow held up the signed papers. Mrs. Kendall's wishes are notarized, witnessed, and legally binding. The room vibrated with disbelief, fury, and something much quieter beneath it, fear. My mother finally glared at me, her voice a hiss. How did you convince her to do this? I met her stare, letting every ounce of my grief, betrayal, and newfound resolve sharpen my words. I didn't convince her, I said quietly. She saw what you were doing, long before I did. No one spoke after that, not my mother, not my father, not Rachel, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. Whitlow stood. Unless there are questions, this concludes the reading. There were questions they'd scream later, questions they'd hurl at me like stones, but none they could safely ask in front of a man with legal authority. So I stood, gathered my grandmother's file, and walked out of the room without looking back. Behind me, the life my family thought they controlled collapsed into stunned silence. That afternoon, the storm clouds finally cracked open above town as I walked back into Whitlow's office, summoned for one final clarification, though I already knew exactly what it would be. The conference room felt tighter this time, charged with leftover rage. My parents sat rigidly, Rachel pacing like a fuse waiting to catch. Whitlow stepped in, adjusting his files. Before we conclude, he said, there is one last matter Mrs. Kendall prepared in advance. My mother exhaled sharply. What now? Whitlow opened a sealed envelope. Documentation of the Barkov Farm oil rights transfer. Mrs. Kendall registered them solely in Sarah's name months ago. A beat of silence, and then the room erupted. That's a lie, Rachel screeched, lunging toward the table. She never would have done that. Whitlow slid the documents out of her reach with practiced calm. Signed, notarized, witnessed, unbreakable. Roger surged to his feet. Oil rights. Me never even mentioned. That was the point, Whitlow cut in gently. My mother's voice broke into a sharp whisper. How dare she go behind our backs? I forced myself to stand still, gripping the chair so tightly my fingers ached. The storm outside rattled the window, thunder punctuating every accusation their faces hurled toward me. Rachel suddenly rounded on me, eyes wild. You manipulated her, you poisoned her against us. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I held the words back. I didn't need to defend myself. Me had already done that for me. She knew, I whispered. She knew exactly what you'd do. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then Rachel lunged again, going for the documents like she could tear the truth apart with her bare hands. Whitlow blocked her smoothly, sliding the file into a drawer. Miss Kendall, he said sternly, touch those papers again and I will have you removed. Rachel's breath came in ragged bursts. My mother's face drained of color. My father stared at the floor, jaw clenched, unable to meet my eyes. I took a slow, steady breath, because this was the moment I had waited for. The moment everything shifted. The moment I finally stepped out from under their shadow. If you're finished, I said quietly, I'm leaving. And I did. I walked out while their voices tangled behind me, rage, disbelief, desperate denial echoing down the hall. I didn't look back, not once. Outside, the storm hit full force. Rain sweeping across the pavement as if the sky itself understood exactly what had just been washed away. Part 11. High stress, climax. By the time I reached the farm that evening, the storm had broken into a soft drizzle, the kind that left the world smelling like wet earth and endings. I parked by the old barn and stepped out slowly, breathing in the cool air. The field stretched out before me in dark rolling waves, the soil rich and shining beneath the fading gray light. For the first time in weeks, the land didn't feel like it was slipping away from me. It felt like it was waiting. I walked past the barn, boots sinking into the softened ground, until I reached the old oak at the edge of the pasture. Its branches stretched wide and ancient, the bark thick and gnarled. Grandma Me had always said the tree was hollowed with secrets, Kendall roots in every sense, she used to joke. Tonight I wasn't laughing. I knelt at the base of the oak, the mud cool against my jeans, and pressed my hand to the thick bark. "I know you left something," I whispered. "You always knew more than you let on." Lightning flashed faintly, far away now, and the wind rustled through the branches as if urging me on. I dug my fingers into the soft earth, scooping handful after handful until my nails were packed with mud. Then my fingertips hit wood. My breath caught. I brushed away the dirt until the outline of a small, weather-worn box appeared. I lifted it carefully, heart pounding in a slow, heavy rhythm. The lid creaked open. Inside lay a single folded note tied with twine. My throat tightened as I untied it with shaking hands. "Sarah, I knew they'd try. You were always the one meant to protect this place. Now build something better." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, hot, fast, unstoppable. She knew everything before it even happened. And she trusted me to finish the fight she didn't have the strength to finish herself. The drizzle thickened, raindrops mingling with my tears as I clutched the note to my chest. For the first time since she died, the grief didn't collapse me. It fueled me. A car door slammed somewhere behind me. I froze. Footsteps squelched through the wet grass, heavy, familiar, 2 sets. My father's deep voice murmured something I couldn't make out. My mother's sharper tone followed. They were walking toward the house, and they had no idea I was this far out on the property. But they'd come, just like I knew they would. They couldn't leave anything alone, not even now. I closed the box, tucking it safely under my arm, and wiped the mud from my palms onto my jeans. I stood, breath steadying as the rain streaked down my face. "I'll do it, Grandma," I whispered to the oak, to the land, to the night air that felt so eerily still. "I swear." The wind lifted gently, almost like a nod. I turned toward the house, toward the figures moving in the dim light, toward the storm waiting to break all over again. Only this time I wasn't the one who would be caught unprepared. And as I walked back across the field, soaked and determined, I knew exactly what was coming next. Part 12, Low Tension. Solutions. Spring crept over Kentucky in soft greens and golds by the time the farm finally began to look alive again. Truly alive, not just surviving. And for the first time since me passed, the land felt like it was breathing with me instead of through me. 3 months had passed, though it felt both longer and shorter somehow. Grief has a way of stretching time like taffy. But every morning, when I stepped out onto the porch and looked across the fields, the ache in my chest shifted a little more from wound to purpose. That purpose had a name now. Me's Haven. The sign wasn't up yet, but the work was already happening. Volunteers from town, teachers, foster parents, old neighbors who remembered Me's kindness, showed up every weekend with tool belts and casseroles. The barn, once dark and worn, now echoed with the sound of hammers and laughter. Inside, former horse stalls were transforming into bright learning spaces. One room for gardening lessons, another for animal care, a loft area for homework and tutoring. Kids from the county's foster program came on Saturdays, trailing through the fields with wide eyes, touching the horses' noses, planting seeds Me would have insisted on teaching them the names of. This was what she'd meant. Build something better. I walked alongside the garden beds with a woman named Carmen, one of the foster coordinators. She pointed toward the reconstructed chicken coop. "You know," she said with a warm smile, "I've never seen the kids so excited about anything. You're giving them something special here." "I'm just trying to honor her," I replied. "She deserved something that lived on." Carmen squeezed my shoulder. "And you're doing that every day." I looked out across the field, where 2 kids were racing the horses, laughing, free, whole in a way I recognized too well. They looked like I used to look, long before my family learned how to take pieces of me without asking. The wind carried the smell of fresh hay as I walked back toward the porch, where my friend Jacob, one of the volunteers, was tightening the last bolt on a wooden bench. He wiped sweat from his brow. "We'll have this place ready for the summer program, you'll see." I smiled softly. "It already feels like her dream." He nodded. "Maybe, but it's your future." The words hit me harder than I expected. I glanced at the farmhouse. The peeling paint, the creaking steps, the place that held every version of me, even the one I thought I lost when my family tried to strip this land from us. Now something new was blooming in its soil. Kids' voices rose in the distance, shouting, laughing, hopeful. The sound filled the air like a second heartbeat. I whispered into the breeze, "This is what you wanted, Grandma, something that lives on." And the breeze, soft, warm, familiar, seemed to answer. 1 year later, The summer air settled warm and still over Hilltop Cemetery as I walked along the familiar path toward the weeping willow, a small bouquet of sunflowers cradled in my arm. The farm truck ticked softly behind me as it cooled in the shade, carrying the scent of soil and hay that always clung to me now, my perfume, as Jacob liked to tease. I didn't mind. The land had shaped me, held me, saved me. I stepped beneath the willow's cascading branches and knelt beside me's grave. Her headstone was simple, exactly as she'd asked. No marble, no angels, just her name, her years, and one line I chose, rooted in love. I brushed away a few fallen leaves, then placed the sunflowers at the base, bright, bold, stubborn flowers, just like her. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered, settling onto the grass beside her. "It's been a year, though some days it feels like you just left for the porch to make tea." A soft wind stirred the willow branches, swaying them gently. The photo tied to the wooden cross, the one of me smiling beside a newborn foal 40 years ago, fluttered at the edges. "You planned everything," I said with a small smile. "Even your own goodbye." My voice didn't shake the way it used to. The grief was still there, woven into me, but it didn't hollow me out anymore. It steadied me. "You knew what they'd try, and you knew how to protect the farm better than any of us." I reached out, touching the edge of her photo. "I thought I was saving you," I whispered. "But you saved me." A single tear slid down my cheek, not heavy with sorrow this time, but with gratitude, deep, warm, fierce gratitude for a woman who left behind more than land or money. She left roots, purpose, a legacy that stretched far beyond her years. As if answering, the willow leaves rustled again, soft as a lullaby. I stood slowly, brushing soil from my palms. In the distance, laughter drifted across the fields, children at me's haven running through the garden rows, their joy carrying through the summer heat. Life, new life, growing exactly where old pain was buried. I glanced back at the grave one last time. "Thank you," I said softly, "for trusting me, for everything." Then I turned toward the sunlight breaking through the clouds, letting it warm my face as I walked back to the truck, back to the farm, back to the work that would keep me's legacy alive long after both of us were gone. Because legacy isn't land or money. It's courage passed down in silence until someone finally dares to speak it aloud. That was the end of the story. And now, standing here a year later, I still wonder, should Rachel have owned up to what she did at the will reading and finally apologized? Or was her silence just another betrayal we were all meant to accept? Tell me in the comments if you think she did the right thing, or what you believe she should have done instead. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this.